Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you how I made this Farmhouse Coffee Table. This was created using 6 2x4s, some wooden dowels, wood glue, and some paint. This is a project that can be done easily with simple tools like a circular saw and a drill. The first thing I started doing was to create the bottom of the coffee table because I knew this step would take the longest. I set up a stop block and cut 9 pieces to 28 inches long. Once the pieces are doweled and glued together, I'm going to cut them to their final length of 27 inches long. Once all 9 pieces were cut out, I lined them up and used a speed square to mark lines going across 2 boards. This is where I'm going to be drilling holes in each piece to help line up the boards and keep them nice and straight while they're being glued with dowels. This will also give the piece some added strength. If you have a biscuit joiner, you can definitely use that, but I decided to use a drill and a doweling jig I made in a previous video. I'll link that above and in the description below. Once all of the holes were drilled, I did a test beat to make sure the pieces lined up well. Then I took it apart and used wood glue to hold the pieces together and clamped it up. I did the glue up in 2 stages because I don't have clamps long enough for the entire bottom piece. After the bottom part of the coffee table was finished, I trimmed the sides using a circular saw, cutting it to a final length of 27 inches long. I then moved on to the legs and cross members of the table. I set up a stop block to make a rough cut of the cross members, about 38 inches long. Cut them a little longer than they needed to be, so it was easier to work with, and I can cut them to fit later on. As I cut these pieces, I made sure to label them so I knew what pieces were what. After those were cut out, I changed the stop block, setting it to 17 inches, and cut the legs of the table. I fastened the legs to the bottom part of the table using the same method as before, with wood glue and dowels. I did make a mistake here though that I didn't notice until I put the top of the table on. I put the legs on the wrong side, making the final dimensions of the table to be 27 inches by 33 inches instead of 30 by 30. Overall, I'm still really happy with the way it came out. In order to make sure the cross members were the perfect length, I held a piece of wood up to the legs and used a pencil to mark where the pieces started and ended. I then went over to the miter saw and cut the pieces to fit. I used a square to make sure the leg stayed 90 degrees and fastened the piece with clamps and wood glue. I repeated this process with the second piece, holding the piece and marking where I needed to cut it to make sure it was a perfect fit. If I were to do this again, I would have notched the pieces instead to give it a little bit of extra strength. In this clip, you can see me using a piece of scrap wood that I used to help pin the piece in place while it glued and I can get clamps on it. Once the glue was dried, I sanded down the piece. I didn't want to sand away too much because I kind of like that rough look of the table. However, I did spend a lot of time on the top of the table to make sure the wood didn't scratch the glass. Once the sanding was done, I just went over it quickly with a vacuum to make sure that I got all of the dust out of there before I started painting. Now that the table is all sanded down and it had a vacuum taken to it, it's time for paint. I ended up using 3 coats to give the table the finished look that I really wanted. few hours later, the paint was dried and it was time to put the top on, and I was finished. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know what you think of this project in the comments and make any suggestions of what you'd like me to build next. If you aren't subscribed already, please subscribe and give the video a thumbs up. Bye!